Let me paint you a picture of the prolific academic Larry Richardson. On his Google Scholar profile picture, we see a man with a beard, a newsboy hat and glasses, holding a tabby cat. Riveting, I know, but bear with me a moment. Larry's papers were in the maths field. There were 12 in total, and they were cited almost 150 times. But Larry's success was short-lived. After only a week, Google Scholar removed all of his work because all of the papers and the citations were fake. Everything had been generated by AI. Oh, and by the way, now's probably a good time to tell you that in the profile picture, Larry was the cat.
A team of researchers looked into this newest attempt to play the research game and succeeded in engineering the world's most highly cited cat.
Kia ora, I'm Davina Zimmer, and today on The Detail, fake citations are causing real-life damage. So where are they coming from? Where are they popping up? And just how bad is the problem?
Good science requires that the people citing another bit of work have read that bit of work. And if they haven't read that work, it's bad science.
A couple of researchers created a profile for Larry the cat as an experiment and to make a point that the way researchers' productivity is measured is flawed and easy to fake. And fake citations are everywhere.
Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says his Make America Healthy Again Commission report harnesses gold standard science, citing more than 500 studies and other sources to back up its claims. Those citations, though, are rife with errors from broken links to misstated conclusions. 7 of the cited sources don't appear to exist at all.
Lawyers in New York are under fire for citing fake court cases created using the ChatGPT app. AI is becoming more popular amongst lawyers, and generally a lot of professions are using it.
So there's a legal researcher who has been tracking AI hallucination cases, and so far has got a list of 380 legal cases from a range of different jurisdictions where hallucinated cases have been used.
Simon Connell is an associate law professor at Otago University. He says there's been a couple of cases where everyday New Zealanders representing themselves in court have fallen for fake legal citations.
So there are a couple of examples from New Zealand. They're both ones where litigations were representing themselves in person.
Are you saying that most of these fake case studies are created by AI and not actually by real people?
That's right. So what's been happening is somebody will use generative AI, which will create some text for them about the law. And so they've got this piece of text about an area of law, and it might include statements like, a leading authority on this case is Zimmer and Connell, and then there's a citation for the case and it looks real, and sometimes there'll be a quotation from the case that looks plausible, but it may well be that that case is what's called an AI hallucination. It's something that the AI has made up based on the sort of vast bank of information that it has, and superficially it looks real, but it's not actually a real case. And this is a huge problem in the legal context because providing a proper authority is a basic part of legal argument. If you get that wrong, your legal arguments can fail. If you say, well, the law is like this because this case says it is, and that case doesn't exist, then your argument completely falls flat. And unfortunately, various lawyers have been doing exactly that. How
do lawyers even get their hands on them? I mean, it seems like this is something that you would learn in law school not to do.
Well, it's so certainly any lawyer should have learnt in law school that you should do your due diligence with respect to the cases that you're citing. And even if you're citing a case because you've read in a textbook that the case stands for a particular proposition, best practice is still that you should go and read the case yourself and make sure that you understand what it says rather than just relying on what somebody else has said about it. But what's been happening is people will use various generative AI tools and they don't necessarily appreciate what these things are doing. So sometimes people will be under the impression that if you go into a ChatGPT-based tool, that it's kind of like an encyclopedia, that it's got access to this vast bank of human knowledge and that it's going to give you an accurate answer. But that's not what's happening at all. These language models are really kind of predicting human text, so they can put together what looks like a plausible name for a case and plausible content for the case that's just not accurate. So I'll give you an example. A few years ago, I was asking a generative AI to tell me about a case called Honeybee's Preschool and 127 Hobson Street. What that case is actually about is something called the rule against penalties, and it's about a dispute between a tenant and a landlord. But the explanation about the case that I got from AI looked at the name of the case and sort of saw that it had honeybees in there and came up with this superficially plausible explanation that the case was actually about that the preschool had been keeping bees on the property, but it was just completely made up. And when I say made up, these generative AI tools, they're called generative AI because they're creating content for the user on the spot when you're using it. So it's not the case that there's kind of a bank of made up cases out there that people are stumbling across. What's happening is they're using a generative AI tool which is making up these explanations for them that include hallucinations. So there's an example from the Immigration and Protection Tribunal where the appellant, who was trying to challenge a decision by Immigration New Zealand themselves, had searched for a particular point on how long a police certificate was valid, and had this record of what they were told by the Google Generative AI overview and relied on that, tried to use it in their argument at the tribunal, but it's just that it had given an incorrect answer.
There's another case that's happened here. It took place last year, and again it was a citizen representing themselves who was caught out by a lawyer on the other side.
This was a case where the appellant in question was representing themselves in what I think is quite a complicated commercial issue, and they had provided submissions that referred to hallucinated cases, but this was pointed out by lawyers for the other side, and they had an opportunity to remove that before the case continued. I haven't found any court cases in New Zealand where lawyers referred to hallucinated cases. The ones I'm aware of are all litigants representing themselves. So there are now quite a number of cases from other jurisdictions where lawyers have been doing this, but to my knowledge, that hasn't happened here yet.
But, like he said, it certainly has overseas. It doesn't take much searching to find examples. Here are some headlines just from the last week. City lawyer gets off with a scolding for citing fake case law in a civil rights case. Australian lawyer sorry for AI errors in murder case, including fake quotes and made-up cases. NBA's son seeks sanctions over alleged fake case citations. I could go on. Here, the New Zealand Law Society just published an article warning lawyers to beware of these fake cases. When it comes to the consequences of citing fake case law, Simon says citizens tend to get off lightly. Lawyers, not so much.
There can be some very serious consequences. As I said earlier, it's a basic part of legal argument that if you are talking about the law, you should provide authorities, and if your authorities don't actually exist, then your legal argument can fall over and you can lose the case. So a lawyer who has carelessly used AI-generated hallucinated cases can have an issue with their client. Potentially they've lost the case and the client might be able to bring an action negligence against them, and the Law Society, the regulatory body that looks out for professional conduct by lawyers, may also end up imposing some disciplinary consequences. So it can be quite a serious matter.
So what's being done to monitor this? Is it a case of banning ChatGPT? How do we get rid of it? I mean, AI has become such an integral part of society.
So what we want to get rid of is improper use of AI, and in particular, people relying on hallucinated cases. In a sense, that's relatively straightforward. Lawyers should be doing their due diligence and making sure that the cases that they're citing exist, and reading the cases to make sure that they actually say what they're saying. All of these cases of lawyers getting caught out using hallucinated cases could have been prevented if they had actually looked up the cases properly themselves to make sure that they exist. So in one sense, the answer is sort of straightforward, is for practitioners to be careful with the materials that they're referencing to. The various sort of entities across different jurisdictions have provided some guidance on this. So courts in New Zealand, the Law Society in New Zealand, and I think recently the High Court in England have all provided sort of alerts around this issue. And basically it sort of boils down to that point of understand the software that you're actually using and don't make any claims that you can't be sure that you can back up. I think it would be unfortunate to try and take an approach to sort of drastically stamp down on the use of generative AI in law. Generative AI has a lot of potential to be a very useful tool, both for practicing lawyers and also lay people. It needs to be used carefully because of these sorts of issues around hallucinations. Also, if you have a generative AI that's drawing on sort of all the material it can get on the internet, then it's not necessarily going to be able to filter which legal materials are relevant to New Zealand. And this is one of the other issues that people can come across. If you are, for example, ask generative AI for a summary of the law, it might give you a summary of the law that's quite accurate for England or the USA, but it might not capture some of the points of our law.
Let's get back to Larry Richardson, who holds the distinction of being the world's most cited cat.
They computer-generated a bunch of gibberish papers with the cat as author and more gibberish papers that cited the cat's papers. And voila, 2 weeks later the cat had 12 papers, 132 citations and an H-index of 11.
Remember, the reason behind this was to prove that the way academic productivity is measured isn't actually a good representation of a researcher's quality and can be manipulated. Peter Gluckman is the president of the International Science Council. I sat down at his office in Auckland to talk about how these fake citations are popping up in the science world and how they're part of a bigger problem.
The bigger issue is there are lots of bad scientific papers out there because the incentives out there are for these predatory journals where people can pay to have their paper published without it going through proper peer review.
I think it's helpful to clarify what may seem like an obvious question, but what are citations?
Citations are the references that are put into scientific and academic literature. So good academic literature always refers to relevant and past work. And citations are, if you like, just a word for the references. Science is a broad canvas from the digital sciences, the natural sciences, the social sciences, and some of the scientifically orientated humanities. The issue is there are many ways in which science can be badly done. One of the ways it's badly done is by not citing people who should be cited, and that happens quite a lot, particularly if the literature is old and not caught up in the electronic databases. Secondly, people may oversight their own work at the extent of other people's work. And thirdly, what we're seeing now, and it's just part of bad science, I'd like to call it non-science, where people put in references that are inappropriate or are made up. And of course, the more that people are using AI, the more likely that we're seeing made-up references.
So AI is creating some problems. But this bigger problem Peter is talking about didn't start with AI.
What happened was, until about 1980 or thereabouts, the global scientific community was relatively small. There were relatively few scientific journals, and in your field, you could be aware of all the life sciences journals or all the physical sciences journals by referring to a booklet that was published every week, which just told you the titles of the journals. And then it got computerized into larger systems. And then people decided they could put metrics around it. How many papers were published? How many times were they cited by other people? And that became a proxy for quality used by employers, universities, by funders, even by governments, as a pseudo measure of impact and quality. Now, it's nothing like that at all. And there are all sorts of issues, and around the world there's been a lot of efforts by the scientific community to eradicate what we call false use of bibliometrics, bibliometrics being the word to describe the use of metrics to analyse the scientific literature. Unfortunately, it's very convenient and people keep on using it.
Are you saying essentially the more your article gets cited, the better you look, I guess, as a scientist?
That's how it's perceived. It may not mean that. It might be a bad paper and it's cited a lot to say that the paper is rubbish. But there are many other issues. So, for example, some journals market on the basis of the impact factor, which says papers in this scientific journal are cited more than papers in another journal. But that might mean only one or two papers in that journal are very well cited. It says nothing about the quality of the papers overall. The whole of society has become metricised, and this is just the metricisation of science. What's changed now, and why you're probably asking me in this podcast, is the role of AI, which has generated the possibility of people to write papers, maybe based on good data, but write them without doing the work themselves of reading all the literature. And AI, as we know, particularly large language models, hallucinate. If they don't know the answer, they may make up the answer. And so what we have now is a problem where the scientific record could be contaminated by these papers. I don't think that's the bigger issue. I think the bigger issue is the culture that universities, employers, funders have, where they don't look at the individual by actually looking at their career, seeing where they are in their career, what have they contributed. It may be only one paper, it may not be in the most prestigious journal, but it may make the biggest difference to the world.
But instead of that, Peter says it's often about the H index.
A H index of 10 means you've published 10 papers which have each been cited at least 10 times. An H index of 30 means that you've published 30 papers which have each been cited 30 times. Now, in science, it's assumed generally that in most of science, but it doesn't apply everywhere, so mathematics tends to have much lower publication rate, or economics does. They have very few but very deep papers, as opposed to molecular biology where people publish lots of papers. I mean, some of the best scientists in the world have not published a lot of papers. They might only have 5 papers that have been heavily cited. So it's a largely debunked but widely used index. And that's the problem, that human nature is it's far better to have a pseudo-objective measure over something that's inherently subjective. If I'm looking at a young scientist or a senior scientist, I want to read their papers. Do their papers make sense? Have they added to the body of knowledge in a significant way? Have they got a line of argument that builds on itself? That's far more meaningful to me than being told they have an H index of 35 or an H index of 45 or they've been cited 8,000 or 10,000 times.
Because there's many ways someone could boost their H index. They could cite their own work, or like with the case of Larry the cat, they could use a citation boosting model.
In today's video, we'll discuss a crucial aspect of an academic career, boosting your research impact by increasing your citation count.
Anything that is not inherently robust in science is concerning, whether it's false data, a poorly written paper, a paper that doesn't recognise other contributions, or a paper that makes up contributions that are not there.
You spoke to Stuff, it was, I believe, about this topic about two years ago. And how have things changed in the field since then?
Well, I think what's happened in the field since then is we've seen more and more opportunities for AI and large language models being used to confabulate the scientific record. And we can't afford that. And so there's a lot of, but at the same time, AI has done good things for the scientific record. It's helped us identify plagiarism. It's helped us identify when data is being manipulated, because sadly there is a small percentage of scientists who don't follow the guidelines in science, as there are in any other profession, people who don't follow the rules. And science relies on being self-correcting, and the most important thing in self-correcting is keeping the scientific record valid.
I mean, I had the question on my list here is, how do we fix this? But I kind of want to rephrase it and ask, can we fix this?
I don't know the answer to that, and I mean that genuinely. First of all, the genie's out of the bottle with AI in a way that will be very hard to put it in. AI will be used more and more actually to detect the fact that AI has been misused. But, the protection as we understand at the moment relies on the integrity of the scientist reading everything that's in the paper that he or she cites. I think that fake news, to use that horrible terminology, has invaded all sorts of areas. People in the last decade have seemed almost empowered to confabulate more, and AI helps them do that because they can make up a good story. It's very sad for the human condition. Whether it's in law or in science or in any other area, the second that reality is compromised and we're living in a world that's made up, then societies can't ultimately function well.
That's all for today from The Detail, a newsroom production supported by RNZ and NZ On Air. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by Alex Harmer. Thank you to Peter Gluckman and Simon Connell for joining me in this episode. I'm Davina Zimmer. Ka kite.